Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. Thank you so much for joining us for our webinar today. It's called Diversity and Inclusivity, Changing Why to How. So you have some great panelists that are coming up. They'll be introduced a little bit to you shortly. And this is being brought to you from INSSA, which is the International NGO Safety and Security Association, as well as the Isrm, Women in Security Chapter. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Louisa to give you a little bit of an introduction to ISRM, and then it'll go to Javier for introduction on INSSA. Louisa?
Thanks, Daniela. So I'm not going to keep us long because I'm really interested to hear the discussion today as well. So yeah, my name's Louisa Schneller, and alongside Daniela, we are co-chairs of the ISRM Women in Security Group. And the ISRM aims to create a space where everybody, if it's academics, practitioners, students, can really come together, learn and share information about our industry so we can move forward. And as a group, the Women in Security Group within ISRM, we strive to do this, but we also try and provide a platform for voices that we don't always hear in our profession, whether that's from women, minorities, voices from LGBTQI communities and neurodivergent communities, and that there's power in diversity. And to access it, we have to really take a moment to listen to people, to understand the experiences. And the group, we're well into our second year now. And one thing that we're really pleased and proud to be doing this year is partnering with Insa to bring you events like what we have today. So I'm going to pass over to Javeria Malik now, so she can give you a bit more of a background on Insa.
Thanks very much, Louisa and Daniela. Yes, I also don't want to take any more space than necessary, maybe just 1 minute before we actually start the webinar. Thank you so much to everybody who's joined us from across the world. And a great thanks to our panelists. INSA, what is INSA? So INSA, International NGO Safety and Security Association, it's a nonprofit global membership association of individuals working in the security field or those who are interested in the security field. And we promote safety and security of aid workers who are operating in dangerous environments. And we do it through 4 means or 4 avenues of programming. One is advocacy, the other is collaboration, then education and professional development, and the last but not least is standardization. INSA was founded in 2008, and so far we have over 4,300 members globally. And this number keeps rising, keeps increasing, and we're very, very humbled by the interest and support that we receive. So if you are a security risk management professional or you're interested in this field, please do join INSA as a member. It's absolutely free of cost. www.insa.org. All right, and sorry, I did not introduce myself. I am Javeria Malik. I'm the chairperson of INSA. All right, so with that, I will hand back to Daniela.
All right, thank you so much, ladies, for the great introductions to the organizations. And we have more information on both on our website at theirsm.org. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce our moderator for today is Miriam Hussein. She's a strategic marketing professional based between Australia and Pakistan. So Miriam, we're handing the baton over to you to get us going this morning, afternoon, okay?
Thank you so much, Daniela. First of all, a very warm welcome to all of you who've joined us today. Most of us are aware that diversity and inclusion are about respecting and appreciating what makes people different. These differences could be in terms of age, gender, ethnicity, religion, ability, sexual orientation, education, and national origin. And then there are also aspects of cognitive diversity and neurodiversity. Inclusion is not just tolerating these differences, but truly valuing them. But in today's webinar, we will be moving past this initial discussion of what diversity and inclusion really are, and we will focus on how to promote them in different spaces through some practical tips and suggestions. Considering the caliber of our today's panelists, I'm certain that we will leave today's webinar with lots of inspiration to champion the diversity cause. Without further ado, I would now introduce our distinguished panelists. Their profiles will also be posted in the chat for your review. We have our diversity and inclusion expert, Sutapa Sanyal. She is an advisor on women's leadership and a public speaker on D&I, gender leadership, and public policy, to name just a few. Hi, Sutapa. How are you going?
Hi, everyone.
Hi. Hello. Next, we have Yolanda Hamblen, a member of the IFPO Advisory Board, ASIS International Physical Security Steering Committee, and Women in Security Global Alliance. Hi, Yolanda. And finally, we have Alexandra Hoffmann, CEO and driving force behind Crisis Ally, a company promoting diversity through professional expertise. Hello, Alexandra.
Hello, everyone.
Wonderful to have you all. I think we will just jump straight to the questions now. My first question is to you, Yolanda. What does diversity mean to you, and why is it such an important issue to you personally?
Hi everybody. Hi ladies. It's such a pleasure to be with you and to be invited to be a panelist today in such a good company. What does diversity mean to me personally? I have worked in business as a minority since 2002. It's fair to say that I've had my fair share of scars, and the CEO of Aviva came out recently to talk about openly the kind of misogyny that she had faced as the CEO of Aviva. And it's worth noting that her article is compelling, and I should imagine that she's not alone in her journey to the top, and certainly not alone in her journey being made more challenging by others than it needed to have been. So I definitely would recommend, if you haven't come across that article, to take a look. But look, diversity means variety in its simplest of terms. Minorities will never have the right voice if they stay in the minority. Minorities will never feel safe if they feel that they're in the minority and remain in the minority. Minorities will never flourish in environments where diversity is not embraced. So when everyone is included, everyone wins. And diversity, I suppose, is like being invited to the party. Inclusion is about being asked to dance, and we all enjoy dancing. It feels good, doesn't it? So inclusion is belonging. What does diversity mean to me? It means I must do all I can to ensure diversity and inclusion is at the forefront of all of my activities, my responsibilities, my recruitment, my projects outside of work, where I sit on other boards. I remind myself it's important to be a critical friend to these organizations and to any project that I manage, to ensure that diversity and inclusivity is always firmly on all agendas. I recently qualified in a course on Future Learn, which I would recommend, and it's called Gender Inclusive Approaches in Technology. It was so powerful. I learned academically what I already knew and felt, but did not know how to articulate beforehand. So let me be clear. I did a qualification to confirm how I was feeling. Now, I felt that my opinion alone wasn't enough. I felt that it really should have been. I learned the power of having a qualification underpins my valuable opinion. And now I feel more empowered to express my opinion. And that's a big change. I had been so dissuaded from sharing my opinion in the past. Finally, I learned that we're not there yet, and that we need to do each our own part in diversity and inclusivity to ensure that those that come after us have safer work environments, safer bus journeys home, safer walks home in the dark. It's called leaving the ladder down. And I think that we should keep that in the forefront of all of our activities, because our successors should feel empowered to know that they belong. and to believe that they're in the right place. And we can make that happen collectively, all of us. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Each one of us playing our own part. What a beautiful, what a beautifully put thought. Building on that, my next question is for you, Sutapa. Can you share a personal experience that brought this issue to life and made it real for you?
Well, first of all, many thanks to Isrm and Insa for having me here today for this wonderful and very meaningful panel and the type of discussions that we are likely to hold on this. Well, for over 3 decades plus, I have served in a profession where the diversity index, and here I'm referring to the gender diversity factor, is very, very low. It is still very low. Diversity is low, what to talk of inclusivity, right? Of course, there have been some changes, but unfortunately, it's a creeping change, and still today, the number of women we find in the police services, or for that matter, the security services, in India is about 7 to 8%, right? So you get the background. Now, honestly, at that point of time when I entered the service, I didn't know about these, words, diversity, equity, inclusion. But ironically, I faced the entire spectrum of, what lack of diversity poses, the challenges which lack of diversity poses in an organization, even without knowing what was happening, This wasn't there when I was taking the exams for the civil services or when I went for the training. Although I was the only woman in an entire batch of 78 officers, right, during the training also, but I never faced anything of this sort. It all started when I go back to my, state cadre for the actual service part of the Indian Police Service. I noticed certain patterns, and this I noticed several times. Some of them were hilarious, like people coming to see a woman in uniform, or my, juniors addressing, not knowing whether to address me as sir or madam or what, So those were the hilarious parts. But yes, there were patterns which were repeated and which did, to a large extent, harm my career, right? So, more often than not, obviously, I was the only woman in the room. And so during meetings also, so what I suggested did not carry that weight which what my male colleagues suggested did. So that is something which I felt. And then again, when it was a question of giving field postings or making an officer the district police chief, I felt I was being sidelined, So this happened because, there were those typical second guessings in the minds of my seniors and the decision makers. Well, will she be able to control the law and order? Will the male colleagues accept her as a leader, and so on and so forth? For years, I couldn't understand why this was happening. And then, as I understood the issues related to diversity, equity, inclusion, and gender diversity and all, then I realized that it was not so much about me as it was about my gender. Because we were supposed to have got the same training at the Police Training Institute. We were supposed to have the same skill sets for policing. But here I was seeing a new pattern, And then eventually I realized that it was not about me, but about my gender, and that the decision makers were being guided by all the unconscious biases, gender biases, the implicit, basically the blind spots, which all of us carry even without realizing it. And for the simple reason that largely for the reason that they didn't have a template before them as to where they would place me, as to how they would judge me, right? They didn't have these yardsticks for the simple reason that there weren't too many other women. So, but then this had a positive outcome. Even after hanging up my boots, I still work on these issues because I feel my life would have been easier had there been more women officers. maybe my career trajectory would have been different, much better than what it took, because all the time I had to work harder, doubly harder to convince my seniors that, look, I can do what you can do, what the others can do. So I still work on these issues. So that was a positive outcome. And I think all organizations need women. Now, I have confined myself to gender diversity. I'm making it clear, although there are various forms and layers of diversity, right? And I think every organization needs women because of the perspectives they bring, and more so in policing, where you are constantly in touch with the civil society and you are delivering critical inputs to society. Yeah, so thank you.
Sutapa, thank you so much. It was such a personal experience, truly heartfelt. And I really like the way you put it, like carrying the weight of being different, and how it actually felt you made us go through it and, get a feel of it. Thank you so much. My next question, Alexandra, is to you, and it does build on the first two questions. What are the key challenges in the way of achieving this diversity and inclusivity, and how can we overcome them?
Thank you very much, Maryam. And thank you very much to the ISRM and ISNA for having me today. I'm really happy to be here this afternoon. And I'm based in France, for those who don't know me. So it's, I think there are many challenges. I'm not an expert in D&I. I'm just a regular person. And I've been in a very male-dominated industry for over 20 years now. That's how I got interested into this topic. But my experience is that the biggest challenge right now is that we should all feel responsible for this topic. And I think the responsibility is not shared at this point. It's only a bunch of people here and there, taking this topic in hand and, like us, doing something about it, right? But not enough people are feeling responsible for it. And I'm saying this also, I'm not into gender diversity, just to be very, very clear. I'm into diversity for everything and everyone, to be very, very clear and straightforward on this. I've actually given a webinar on this very topic this morning in France. And to me, it's all about, diversity of way of thinking. Right? And in that way, we can make sure we include everyone. And this is where everyone then starts to have 100% of the responsibility in this as well. If I want to be sitting at a table, then I'm 100% responsible to make sure I do whatever is necessary to sit at this table I want to sit at, right? And I think the same applies to pretty much everyone. And so that's a big challenge, okay, to make sure that everyone takes full responsibility for this topic, not only part of the population in the world, right? I think another one is, this one is tricky because the way I've been talking about this topic for several months now, and I've actually heard a lot of men complaining about the way this is handled in organizations, because they actually feel left aside. And that's why I don't want to talk about gender diversity. I'm sorry to pound you with that, because this is not the point. The point is we want to make sure that we have people who are very different background, whether it's a career, university, racial, religious, political, whatever it is, right? We just want people who make sure that we're going to be challenged whenever we face a situation, right? Especially in our industry, which is security and crisis management, resilience, whatever it is, risk management as well, we need to be challenged. So if we all surround ourselves with people who think like us, we miss the target completely. So the point is, the way it's being done by some organization at this point, I think, is a bit of a trap, which doesn't make it easy for the mass to get full responsibility with this topic. So these are the two challenges I'm seeing.
Alexandra, thank you so much. Diversity in the way of thinking. This is a brilliant idea, and I think it covers many aspects of diversity and inclusivity. Moving on, my next question is to you, Sutapa. Could you comment on the influence of COVID-19 in the new normal? Is it impacting the DEI priorities? And if so, how?
Yeah, so my sense is that COVID-19 has been a kind of a mixed bag, with certain positive inputs also, but obviously largely inputs which have shaken us. This black swan effect has impacted people and organization in various different ways, right? And the journeys have been very, very different for people, right? So on the one hand, I was just going through an Intel India report, which says that it has generated more awareness towards some positive outcomes. It has been an eye-opener. It has been a learning that diversity, equity, and inclusion is the only sustainable way forward for organizations as well as for individuals, because because it can create heightened awareness about capacities of people, bringing in diverse people and moving away from that affinity bias, having more like me, that syndrome, that I recruit more people, I be with more people who are more like me, right? So that thing has emerged in the employers' minds, and many of them are actually, with sincerity trying to design policies which bring in diversity and inclusivity, a sense of, belonging and inclusion, because that is the only way where you have happy, productive workspaces, right? Where everybody is contributing his or her optimal best, right? So there are organizations who are trying to bring this into place. This is what the study says. Well, there have been some other eye-openers also, especially the importance and the benefits of technology have been harnessed, through, exactly right what we are doing. Not that it wasn't there before the COVID, but people made more use of the virtual, medium for everything, right? Right from schooling and classes to meetings and everything. And so people have been able to save time, energy, and expenses on commuting. So that, kind of releases a lot of resources. So that is there, and flexible work hours and hybrid workplaces, work from home, etc., have, given more depth to people's lives. So the organizations also, they can now change and redesign and rethink the how and where and who and what to be worked and to be delivered, right? So that gives them more elbow room, especially, and this has been especially helpful for people who are, juggling, especially, say the women and the mothers who are juggling, multitasking, doing multiple tasking. It has made their juggling up slightly easier, right? And remote working and digitization has brought forth the capacity of more objective and broader hiring processes, right? Removing the biases which I had spoken of before. And it has also shown that there is more rationale for designing tools and processes and investing in DEI. The organizations seem to have realized it. And yes, it has brought forth the ethical issue, because organizations must represent the community they are working with or doing business with, right? It's just more ethical to do so. And but then it has had the flip side also, and it has disproportionately impacted certain sections, also known as the marginalized, the vulnerable sections and groups. Small examples. Supposing the only breadwinner has lost his job, the whole family suffers. Families living in one-room apartments, we talked so much about social distancing and physical distancing. Think about them. So infection rates were so high for them, right? And then say they have a limited amount of water. They have had to consciously think whether they're going to use that water to wash hands for 20 seconds, or they're going to use it to wash utensils or cook or whatever. So that impact has been disproportionate. And and I would give one example from India. Like, we have a huge unorganized sector where there are more women working. Now, you would have read also about the reverse migration. Many women have gone back with their families and they're not going to come back. We talk of the great resignation. If we look closely, it's the women who are leading it. Leading is an unfortunate word because they are falling off and they're unlikely to come back to these jobs. Jobs are disappearing and they're unlikely to come back. So these are the side effects, the flip side of it, the downside of it. And it's going to generate, it's a very strange situation. I mean, in economics, because I come from that background, I find that there will be chunks of unemployment, right? There would be jobs which are available, but people wouldn't want to take it because, when the reverse migration was happening, the argument was at least we won't be asked to leave the cities and our jobs suddenly. At least we'll earn little, but we'll share that little in our family. At least we'll be with our family. At least if we get infected, at least we'll die with our family, in our family. So, it has both the sides, and the way forward would be obviously to catalyze and, make use of all the positive things that have emerged, which my co-panelists would have talked of and will speak of, I think, right? So, yeah, that's it.
Sutapa, thank you so much. What a comprehensive answer. And although it's such a detailed topic, we would like you to go on, but very comprehensively put together. My next question is to Alexandra. Who are the key stakeholders that we must influence to make progress in this area, and how do we do that?
Who are the stakeholders? Wow, I can't name them. However, I have some idea about the strategy. Let me share a story with you. 2.5 years ago, I was already into my company and my business, and I'm having this conversation with this peer of mine, and we have very different background. He comes from the police. And all of a sudden, halfway through the conversation, he very nicely asked me, "What do you know about crisis management, you civilian?" It took me days to recover from this very nasty question. And at the time, I didn't say anything. I didn't call it out. Okay. And then on and on, I've had different experience like these, obviously, in the past 2.5 years. Recently, I had another one by a gentleman who looked at me and said, "You're so young. What do you know about crisis management?" Although he doesn't know my age, right? I called it out this time because I had, it had grown into in me, basically, that I had to speak up if I wanted things to change, right? So I called it out and I said, "What do you mean when I'm too young? First, you don't know how old I am. And second, what do you mean, right?" And as long as you don't have a bald head or gray hair, and it's quite hard to understand. So at least he started to explain his bias, which was very fair. And he said he did it in a nice way and polite way. So I was like, okay, I can understand. Fair enough, right? And 2 weeks ago, I'm attending an event in person. I'm sitting at a table speaking with a peer of mine, and we know each other. He knows exactly what I do for a living. I know what he does. we speak. He's like, oh my God, I love what you do with your workshops, with your job, with your work, and congratulating me, celebrating what I do. I'm like, oh, thank you, thank you, thank you. And then we have this other peer of ours joining the table. In his 60s, bald head, the exact archetype the other guy had talked about several weeks before, right? Okay. And I know both of them really well. Okay. So I'm very close to both of them. And I'm like, okay, here is so-and-so. I can introduce you. You may know each other. And all of a sudden, he listens to this peer of mine who I'm just presenting, introducing. He's like, oh, would you be interested in giving a workshop to my team on crisis management? At this point, I almost fainted. And I didn't call it out because I didn't want to put everyone and make anyone uncomfortable, right? But my point is, the only thing we can do is by, number one, telling stories like I just did, real life stories, and calling it out, calling it out, calling it out. People have no idea because of their biases. I have biases myself, right? We don't even realize what we're doing. We don't even realize the impact of small sentences like this. I'm pretty sure all of these gentlemen I'm talking about didn't have anything against me personally, right? It's just huge biases. And if we don't call it out, they won't wake up. We also have biases, okay, sometimes, and I see it every day. I see many people just being very comfortable in their own biases and feeling very, very comfortable in the position we've put them in. We have to get out of that. That's what I'm saying. So calling things out, telling stories, yes, it is uncomfortable at first, but this is the only way to get a conversation going and to raise awareness, whoever the stakeholders are.
Raising awareness. Amazing, amazing, Alexandra. Thank you so much. Yolanda, my next question is to you. Now, moving towards the solution, how can we move diversity and inclusivity conversation from why to how?
Okay, so I related back to the course that I went on to get some really good content here, because the course provided really good opportunities to put words into action, which I'm really passionate about. And I think, first of all, point number one is that we need to recognize the need for accountability. So remember, we're talking about all types of diversity and inclusivity. We're talking about all types of organizations, project groups, pro bono work, anything like that. I think we need to set gender targets and create a program of initiatives to support minorities, to advance to more senior positions. What we're finding at the moment, generically in the security industry, is that a lot of the junior security officers, for example, they would all be from the Black, Asian minority community, but all of the leadership would be white. And so there is clearly a disconnect between those individuals on the front line being able to relate to where their career can take them. So, there needs to be initiatives to support minorities to advance to more senior positions. And we can do things like, reverse mentoring, returning to work schemes, sponsorship programs. I've got a whole list. So if you want to reach out independently for anything that I'm going to tell you now, please feel free to do so. I've got it on a Word document. I can email it to you. I think point number two, we need to be an attractive and inclusive working environment. 82% of women make sure that they choose those key things when selecting an employer. And it's not always a conscious bias. Sometimes it's an unconscious bias, because sometimes we just need to know we're going to work for a company that cares about its employees. Maybe it has a good established HR program, key HR nominated individuals within the organization. So 82%, that's quite powerful. Progression needs to be available. The responsibility should not rest, for example, and this is in addition to Alexandra's point she made just now, which was incredibly eloquently done. Responsibility should not rest solely on individuals that are already underrepresented, which is exactly what you said. And it's the minority who is moving the conversation. It's the minority who are driving this. So having allies in the wider percentage is going to be key to our success and to our development. Management should invest in their employees and hold themselves accountable. We should, for example, include and integrate diversity and inclusivity in all of our programs and initiatives and ideas and product launches and groups. And especially those individuals that will be affected, targeted or collaborating with. So for example, in my workplace at Virgin Media O2, I'm involved with a mentor program. And I said to our team that consists primarily of white women, I said, we've got to make sure that we include all of the other programs. We've got to include the hidden disabilities teams. We've got to include the visible disabilities teams. We've got to include our internal LGBTQ plus Proudly network. We've got to include the men's mental health network. And it kind of opened up a whole new way of thinking, because we can't by ourselves go ahead and include a program that's going to be inclusive and then not include people right through from the concept to the ending. And that's the way we will direct things going forward. So does anonymized recruiting, for example, work in STEM, in science, technology, engineering, and math? No, and it never will until equity exists in that area. Where equity doesn't exist, we can't do anonymized recruiting. We must recognize societal factors. We need to identify groups with vulnerabilities. We need to know who our target is. We should know what their needs are. And we should ask all the time, what's working, what isn't working. This is something that all of my teams at work will be aware of, because I ask them to do the same in all of their one-to-ones. What's working, what isn't working. You get some great conversations out of that. Be open to feedback. Regulate yourself, sense check yourself, look for bias. We need to understand bias and how it impacts everybody in our environments. We don't want to replicate biases, yet it's happening. The media just adds jet fuel to biases. We've got to conduct inclusive research. We've got to get inclusive feedback, and we've got to use inclusive language. And finally, it's not about hiring different people. It's about building a culture where people feel included. Reach out if you want to know any more. Thank you.
Building a culture where people feel included. This is amazing. We are now getting a lot of questions from the audience as well. I'd like to hand it over to you, Daniela, to get some questions from the audience and pass them on to the panelists. Over to you, Daniela.
Okay, thank you so much. So we will start at the top here. We do have quite a few questions. So the first question to the panelists are, as professionals who deliberately promote diversity and inclusivity in your professional and personal lives, how do you continuously motivate yourselves? You all are an inspiration to many, but where and how do you find inspiration yourselves? Any tips for the audience? So anyone who wants to jump in? We start with Alexandria.
It's hard. It's hard sometimes. The thing where I'm pretty lucky is I've known what I wanted to do since I was a teenager. So it's not like I've landed in that job by chance, right? So I know exactly what I want to do. So to me, the way to stay, I would say, inspired and to keep my feet grounded, I would say, is really to stick to the vision and to what I want to achieve, really. And sometimes I've stumbled really, really hard. Sometimes I've wanted to just change course of action. It's like, you know what, it's not for me anymore. But at the end of the day, I know exactly what I want. So yeah.
Thank you. Anyone else wanted to, Yolanda?
Yeah, sure. I think living life with a diversity, equity, and inclusivity lens, like we all do, it will naturally attract highly motivated individuals. We're probably all in our own way very self-leadership driven, and we need to be motivated because it's hard. and the journey is hard, and it doesn't come without scars, you know. So I think it comes down to that resilience of just finding the gaps, finding ways that we can communicate differently, finding ways that we can act better. But I think the one driving force that drives me personally is that I think I need to be a better ally. I need to be a better ally to all of the causes that I believe in. Diversity and inclusivity, I consider myself an ally. And to do that, I need to get educated, I need to stay current, I need to stay relevant, and it needs to be purposeful. And so that's what drives me.
Cool. Sutapa, did you want to answer that as well?
Yeah, as Yolanda spoke of scars, you know, I told you, I continued, it was a natural progression for me, for all the scars which I had got during my service time, right? So, and I personally think, you know, that there should be diversity in the police service and the security services, because, you know, there are certain issues. Again, I'm restricting myself to the gender issue. Of course, allyship is very important. Everything is important in diversity, because there are certain issues where which women can handle better in the police, right? So I continue work. I also work with the corporates, because I find that, you know, there is a bias against women, especially say the returning mothers, you know, who are coming back, who had taken the sabbatical, coming back. So those are the things I discuss. I discuss why there is so much of discrimination, gender discrimination. But then again, I will say that reverse discrimination is also out of the picture. I mean, you cannot kind of discriminate against the men if you're trying to, you know, bring in certain things for the women. So that is also there, which obviously translates into allyship. And somewhere, you know, of course, it's difficult, because at times you do get motivated when you demotivated when you see the creeping pace of change. But then I feel that if not me, who, you know, because of all the things that I have undergone. And I think being dedicated and steady on the path will bring results, maybe at a very snail's pace, but yes, it will be. It will come. And so I persist.
Excellent, excellent. So our next question is, what has been your greatest learning personally while working on DEI issues? Alexandra, you want to start, and then we'll go back around?
I'm thinking about this one. Greatest.
Okay.
Can you hear me well? Can you hear me fine?
Yes, we can.
Okay, I'm getting a message saying that the signal is weak, that's why. Greatest learning personally, I would say that I've learned a lot, intellectually speaking, by reading some reports and studies and research papers and statistics, no doubt about this. But the biggest one is actually related to what I was saying before, is that I play a huge role in this, basically, as much as, you know, anyone else. And I would say the biggest learning for me personally is that if I don't speak up, there's no way things will change, at least for me. I'm not expecting things to change for the world when I speak up, but at least for myself, right? Which is a start. And because I like to bring this one up, and I know I've been thanked for this in the past. As a mother of two young kids, 5 and 2 years old, the biggest learning is that the level of responsibility I have to raise those kids. I know that I have biases like every human being on this planet, right? But at least trying to educate them with a sense of equity, inclusion. Yeah, that's a huge responsibility as a parent. And I know not everyone is a parent, but as long as we care for children, the level of responsibility in that area And that applies to other human beings, that applies to the environment, that pretty much applies to everything, around us. The level of responsibility is huge.
Thank you for that. That's true for mother as well. So you definitely have to make sure.
As a mom and as a dad, right?
Right.
Everyone,
as a
right?
parent, we'll just say as a
clear.
parent. Yeah. As a parent, that the next generation has to know a different way to think about it. So, Yolanda, did you want to share on this as well?
Yeah, sure. Look, it's twofold. Back in the 80s, when the home computer was introduced to us all as young families, for those of us who were around that long, I barely remember, of course, the marketing organizations behind these PCs basically drove an awful lot of public opinion into steering these towards young boys. Up until the 80s, women had been very prevalent in technology, and women were very dominant in the coding industry. But in the 80s as well, along with the PC and the games that went along with those PCs, the games targeted to boys, Space Invaders, helicopters, planes, fighting, name it, bombs going off. None of that was targeted towards women. The movies that came out in the 80s, I got a whole list of them. You'll remember some of them. War Games, Flight of the Navigator. There were literally 12 top movies that were targeted specifically towards young boys as the hero in the tech world. That they weren't targeted towards women. And so that's quite striking for me. That was a pivotal sea change going in the opposite direction to where we needed it to go. And I resent that happening. And I think it's a shame that we were, as young girls, modeled out of that industry. So it's hardly surprising that getting women into STEM and technology has been very challenging. On top of that, the figures since 2018 are now in decline. Not only are there less Black women in technology globally, there are less Hispanic women, there are less white women. So the global organizations now powering qualifications like the one I went on is to bring about awareness that we are now going back in the wrong direction. And the feedback from women who have been in tech is that they don't feel that the environments are inclusive, and they feel very much a minority, and they don't feel that they have a voice. On the other side, personally, I think the biggest learning for me that is being a woman in a position to recruit for the first time, and it hurt a lot. I felt that my being a woman hiring women was a disadvantage, that I was being asked why I was hiring women. Was I hiring women because they were women? And I was genuinely being asked these questions. I have a great employer. I can't fault them. But I still need to make change within my immediate environment to make sure that I'm responsible for driving us to get on the same page in relation to recruiting diversity. Yes, I will hire the best candidate, but I don't need to be challenged why I'm hiring a certain candidate. Because if I was hiring a man, I would never get asked that question. So we've still got a little bit of work to do. But ladies, we still have to be brave. And I encourage everyone to be brave and ask the difficult question.
Absolutely wonderful. And you brought up something that was dear and dear to my heart, the fact that I know here in the US, we used to actually classify computers weren't machines, but they were women, and most of them were minority women that were hired from HBCUs around the country that actually did all the calculations for NASA and the major projects. So a little bit of history to go with your
huge
comment.
History. It's amazing history. Yeah,
it is. It is sad it's not presented as much. So Sutapa, we'll go over to you next to answer the question.
Well, it will be a very short reply. See, what I feel is, whether we like it or not, there is diversity all around us. There's diversity in nature. There's diversity in all the people whom we meet. So I think the best thing is to harness this diversity, leverage it, right? And rise together. Because obviously people will bring in different perspectives. And if you are walking the same distance every day, whether in your personal life or your professional life, you're going to end up at the same space every day. So diversity will always help you in self-actualization. It's going to help you up, in scaling up your own rather broadening your consciousness, your imagination, everything. So I think it adds a lot of value, not just to your personal life, but also to your professional life. And it kind of gives you the opportunity to give your optimal best. And I kind of define, success. It has a lot of definitions. It has a lot of different definitions for everybody. For me, being successful means living my optimal best every moment, every day. And, at my age, just getting up in the morning and the fact that I'm alive and I have 24 hours to do so much of things, so many diverse things, meet so many diverse people, is actually a big motivation, and it's actually a big push and pull factor. So yeah, that's it.
Beautiful, beautiful. So we have 3 or 4 more questions. So the next one is, how can we attract more diversity into the profession? And I think it's talking specifically into security. It is solely a matter of amending hiring practices, or, for example, do we need to collectively put more effort into leading by example from within?
It's a mix of everything. It's a mix of a lot of things, not just hiring. And I think the first thing I would say is, yes, please get out of the unconscious biases, which all of us carry. It's, it's like an iceberg. Just a tiny bit is above the water. The rest of it is under the water. So all of us have these unconscious biases, but we have to be aware of these unconscious biases towards others. And as long as, these biases are within your head, it's still okay. But the minute they spill out into decision-making, then, hell is let loose. So you have to be very, very careful. So how do you do it? How do you become aware? You won't becoming self-aware is a pretty difficult thing, So I feel that there should be sensitization courses or workshops where you are told about these things, and kind of training and capacity building. I think that's the better word, capacity building, by removing your blind spots. And so this is something which we need to understand. And then second thing is things, normally. So a work culture, a culture of diversity, equity, and inclusion is top down. It has to become a part of the DNA of an organization, and largely it will be top down, driven top down. So let it start from the C-suite so that the intention and the implementation is clear in the minds of everybody. But then probably I think you need also to provide safe spaces to people so that they can, talk about lack of diversity in the workspace, and they can talk about new things, diverse things, so that, and without the feeling that, okay, they'll be shut down, or that they will be told that, okay, you're not adding any value to the conversation going on or the organization. So that is also very important, providing those safe spaces to everybody around us. Yeah.
Excellent, thank you. Yolanda, Alexandra, do you want to add?
I'd like to add on this. So like Sutapa was saying 2 seconds ago, I think it's in many, many companies, organizations, but also industries, it's really hard to actually feel safe, psychologically safe, to speak up. Amy Edmondson speaks a lot about this. She invented the concept of psychological safety. She was actually talking about this yesterday during a webinar I was attending in preparation for the Oslo conference taking place in September, where she'll be speaking. And, implementing diversity and inclusion initiative is great. But if people are not safe to speak up and ask questions, challenging questions, and do their thing, we might as well do nothing. It's actually counterproductive. Amy Edmondson's actually ran studies about this, showing actual data about this. So we might as well do nothing. Otherwise, it's actually counterproductive. Okay, that's number one. So this psychological safety thing. The other thing is that I'm sorry to say, but I'm so tired of seeing those CSOs being named everywhere around the world. And when I say CSO, sometimes it's CSO and head of risk and head of resilience, whatever, title they have. And they just nominate each other from their own internal network. There's no room for anyone outside their own network. I actually heard something like this today with a huge international company. A new CSO was nominated, no job description opened publicly, just nomination among them. As long as we keep doing this, nothing will change. This is true for, I'm talking about our industry here, right? And actually that applies to so many other industries and so many areas. As long as we keep just focusing on our friends, nothing will change. And it's a huge caveat that that's especially in our industry, and so many of us are discussing it one-on-one in private. And I'm actually done. I'm speaking it up and speaking about it publicly, because this shouldn't be. This is not normal. This is actually unethical to me. This is just plain unethical to do this.
I completely understand. It's called networking, but that doesn't get us where we need to be, unfortunately. Yolanda, did you want to share something? And then we have 2 more questions, ladies.
I think, Danietta, when you say networking, you're being very generous and very kind. It's actually called nepotism.
Yeah, well, you're absolutely right. But that's how people get away with it. They put a nice package, a bow on a very nasty package.
So my subject is covering Womenomics, right? It's a great hashtag to have, Womenomics. Basically, it talks about the gender pay gap. Sorry, I haven't had lunch. The gender pay gap from 2017. We will know, especially here in the United Kingdom, that the changes to the Equality Act mean that companies with more than 250 employees have to declare what the gender pay gap figures are within their organization. So let's look at Google. In 2020, women were earning on average 81p for every pound a man earns. Let's look at Apple. And we're talking about organizations that really have been modeled so recently. They shouldn't have legacy issues that all of these old previous FTSE 100, NASDAQ, these old companies that have legacy issues, you can kind of explain why they're still advocating this kind of gender pay gap, but not these modern businesses who surely have new business models. Apple, 2019 to 2020, women earned 79p for every pound a man earns. Facebook, 88p for every pound a man earns. And Amazon, 78p in every pound. And this has dropped from 91p the previous year. 78% of students, by the way, studying technology can't name a famous female working in tech, but don't we all know who the men are? And we should. They've done an amazing job, but we should also recognize who are amazing pioneers that are female, what they've contributed. And Danietta, we can talk more about the interesting thing that we have in common there.
Excellent. And I know we're getting close on time, so I'm going to keep moving with the questions, because you brought something up. There was just actually a lawsuit that was won by women, I believe, of Google, because they were paid because of the gender, the difference in pay for them and the gender gap in particular. But I did want to go to the next question. The person is, he said, well done, great speakers. And his question is, 5 or 10 years ago, did you see yourself sitting here presenting a webinar, and where do you see yourselves in the next 5 years with promoting diversity?
Interesting. What's the question?
Can I answer this one? I can't hear you, Daniela.
My apologies. I wanted to mute so you all could speak.
Can I
too
answer?
Fast. So yeah, if whoever wanted to answer first, do you Did you ever see yourself in this field? And then where do you see yourself in 5 to 10 years?
It's an interesting question. 10 years ago, never would I have thought that I would be speaking about this topic now, today. To be honest with you, when I was an employee, and I was an employee for 18 years for multiple international companies, doing security and crisis management, obviously, I never ever faced a problem. So, and I was so adamant about the fact that I just wanted people to promote me and hire me for my competencies and capabilities, that was just not focusing on anything else, basically just building this experience. And I was actually against speaking this topic, is precisely because I was like, as long as we keep on talking about something, that's another thing that we should keep in mind. As long as we keep on talking about something, it keeps on showing up. It's one of the laws of the universe, right? So as long as I know there are some problems with this diversity topic, but the thing is, the more we talk about it, there's actually a great TED talk about this. I don't remember the name of the lady who talked about this on TED. I could retrieve it if I looked for it, but she's like, she's all against those topics because as long as we keep on talking about it, the problem will keep on showing up, right? So I was pretty much like this for the past 18 years, right? And then I became a vendor. And being a woman in crisis management, resilience as a vendor is wow. So then I got interested into this. And then I had, organizations like yours, Daniela, the ISRM or ISNA, asking me, can you talk about your experience as a woman in this industry? And at first I was not, I was like, what do I say? I don't know. I've been focusing on my experience. But then I was like, yeah, something is happening. I told you those stories before, and those are actual stories, right? And now in 5-10 years from now, I think it's pretty hard to plan where I'll be in 3 months from now, given the world we live in. But I think I'll never, as long as it's necessary, I'll keep an eye on this topic, basically.
Excellent. Yolanda, Sutapa, did you have?
Sure. I don't seem to ever choose the path of least resistance. I started off as a DJ as my first career for 11 years, and there weren't many girls doing that. And we were quite rare. And then I went into the police, and there weren't many girls that did that. And as we've often discussed, no one really chooses to go into security. A lot of people say they fell into it. I say I didn't choose security. Security found me, and there's not many girls doing that. And so it seems that I'm just naturally, I have to own the fact that I seem to be, choosing to spend my time in an area where where I'm a minority. Maybe that says a lot about my character. But in relation to DE&I, I'm not surprised I'm here. This found me, though. The subject matter found me, and I think that's important because it seems to me that it does need talking about, and I think I do feel quite appalled by some of the experiences that I've had. And so therefore, I think the only thing to do is to face it head on. And as for what I'm going to be doing in the future, well, I don't know. Maybe I'll be on a TED Talk with you all fine ladies.
Excellent.
Great.
Sutapa?
So as I have told many times, for me, this was a natural progression because I wanted to tell the stories. I mean, the type of issues which women face so far as diversity and inclusion is concerned, equity is concerned. And so where do I find myself? And several years hence, well, I'll keep talking about this as long as I'm able to, or, right, when the topic becomes redundant because diversity and inclusion has been achieved, all around the world. So whichever comes earlier. So that's where I am today. And I see myself, say 3-4 years, 5 years hence.
Yeah. So Well, we'll actually start with the next question back with you, Sutapa, since you brought this up in your one of your earlier responses. The question is about how can we address unconscious bias?
So the thing is, I think the first thing is to understand that whether we know it or not, or we are aware of it or not, all of us, without exception, have unconscious biases. I'll tell you a small story. See, I've been working on diversity, equity, inclusion, especially the gender aspect of it, from a long time. So it was a couple of years back when I boarded this flight on Indigo, so a couple of years back. So I was just going through that in-flight magazine, and then I heard that the pilot and the co-pilot were women, right? So I thought, okay, so nice, right? And then after some time, when you hit those air pockets or something, and the plane starts shaking and all, then for a moment, it crossed my mind, oh my God, what now? So see, I also had that bias, that gender bias working there. Although I was working on this topic. So somewhere back of my mind, it was there that, okay, a man would have been more competent under these situations. So what to talk of others? See, here I am. And then, I kind of mentally slapped myself as to what I was thinking. So the thing is, we have to become aware of our biases, and it won't come unless you introspect, or unless you have somebody to tell you or show you that, look, here is the bias. So Alexandra's idea of calling it out is very important. You call out, your calling out will not just help you, it will help so many people down the line who face similar circumstances. Then the second thing is, training and capacity building. Coming out of the denial is one thing, but then how do you go forward? So you train, either you take courses or your organization gives you those courses and those. So capacity building, where you understand that, okay, diversity is the way of life. And it wouldn't be very nice if, I have everybody around me who's identical to me. I mean, you just picture what sort of a place that would be. So that we need to understand, and we need to broaden our mind, change our mindsets and broaden our consciousness. Even otherwise, we need to be better human beings, We need to be, and what I understand is the most important thing, especially in this new normal and in this post-COVID world, is compassionate and empathetic leadership. The leaders have to be compassionate. They have to have empathy, and many of them would, because they would have also undergone the problems and the issues and the challenges. There's so much of hurt. There's so much of grief still there. Family members couldn't say, goodbye to their loved ones. COVID took their lives so suddenly. So we need more empathy and compassion in our lives as leaders, wherever we are, so that we, do our little bit to change the scenario. Wherever we are, wherever we stand, whatever we can do towards, bringing in more diversity and, more importantly, inclusivity, because that generates a feeling of belongingness. That generates, it stirs up your motivation that, okay, I belong to this organization. This organization gives me so much of value. I want to add value. So, it's all, it's a package: business imperative, ethical imperative, productivity. So all things go in together. So I think that's how unconscious bias can be. Removing it and seeing what lovely products we can get once we are free from our unconscious biases. Yeah, Daniela.
Okay, thank you so much. And Alexandria or Yolanda, did you want to add?
You want to take it over, Yolanda?
I was just going to say that I think we need to be very conscious about our narrative. I think we all understand what unconscious bias is. We know what conscious bias is. I think we have the right lens on to be able to understand when we need to sense check ourselves. And I think we have the right amount of confidence to correctly challenge when we do see bias or unconscious bias happen. But I think we just have to be more mindful about the bigger picture. I think there are a lot of people in the workplace that think that hiring with diversity, inclusivity in mind, for example, having a program to hire more diversity in an organization, some people misinterpret that as positive discrimination. And I've had people say to me that positive discrimination is illegal. And I said, yes. Yeah, I know that, but hiring with diversity inclusivity program is not illegal. And I think they don't understand the difference. I genuinely think there's a very imprinted bias there. I think there's a definite understanding of what positive discrimination is, but then it's a shame really, because positive discrimination really is just creating balance. And we don't have balance yet. We don't have equity in those industries where we are a minority, and that's where the focus needs to be. So I think we should just keep challenging, making sure that our narrative stays focused on why we're hiring with diversity and inclusivity in mind, and not and to educate those people who clearly see it as positive discrimination.
Thank you. Alexandra?
It's a tough one. Like Sutapa was saying, it's a daily work that we have to basically work on. And I say we as all of us around the world, right? It's being aware of what's going on here and there is actually emotional intelligence at work. And the first stage for that is self-awareness, pretty much like Sutapa was saying. So being aware of those biases is super important. And this morning during this webinar I was giving about diversity, I got asked the question, so what do you do to go against your biases? And I was like, you know what, I have 2 tips for this, which I'm using. I'm not saying everyone should be using them, right? As long as the situation doesn't put me at risk or is not dangerous, obviously, right? When my brain tells me to not do something, I say to him, you know what, I'm going to do it. Number 1. When my brain tells me don't speak to that person or don't listen to that person, she doesn't know what he or she's talking about, I'm like, you know what, I'm going to listen to what he or she's saying. This is how I go about it. I'm like, first of all, I hate being surrounded by people telling me that I'm right all the time. It's just, I'm actually looking for challenges. I'm annoying like this. My husband, thinks I'm a pain for that. But I think this is the most interesting way of growing intellectually and personally in life. And pretty much that's what we need to be, whether it's in our personal life, but also professionally, going after people who will challenge us. That's, for me, is the best way to go against my own biases. And I think that that's hard because, I've been out of my comfort zone big times by doing this, but this is where I've learned and grown the most, really. Seriously, the first time the ISRM asked me to talk about this topic in January, I was like scared. I'm like, what do I know about that, right? And I'm like, you know what, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it because I'm sure it's really interesting. And for once, I'm going to dive into this topic, just getting out of my personal stories and really look into it. And I'm really happy I did it. I'm really happy I did it, So yeah, I think it's a way of going around my own cognitive biases, I would say.
Absolutely, and we're glad you did it. It was an excellent presentation in January, and I think it's wonderful for all of us to think about getting outside of our box, right? Figuring out what makes us uncomfortable and diving into that. So I did have one more question. It came and it went, but I thought it was really good, so I'm going to share it. And it was, do you have any tools, online resources that people can access to help them?
To help them do what? Sorry, Daniela, I missed the first.
Do you have any online resources or tools available for, I guess, diversity or crisis management training?
Okay.
So I don't know if Yolanda, Sutapa, you had anything you would like to share?
I don't have any. First of all, there are plenty of reports about this. It's real easy. You type diversity in Google today, you get, thousands of reports, and really good ones from all kinds of consulting firms who've run studies and research papers. So plenty of things to look for on the internet itself. Go ahead, Yolanda.
I thought you'd finished. The course that I did was a FutureLearn course. FutureLearn is a web-based learning. It was funded by the British government, and a huge amount of budget went into working with universities to provide courses that were available to people outside of universities. And so there's a lot of collaboration with key universities. The Gender Inclusive Approaches in Technology was the course that I did. It was stunning for me. It really was. And it opened my eyes up in relation to some of the huge egregious errors that have been made over the last decade or two in particular, especially when Google got their algorithm wrong in recruiting and based their recruiting selection algorithm on the content from men's CVs and didn't include the content from women's CVs. And so the algorithm naturally picked out men's CVs as more preferable options for recruiting. Obviously, that's a huge learning. It makes you wonder how in our lifetime that could ever be allowed to happen. And how menstruation apps could be designed by men without women in mind, or without women on the panel, without women in some way involved in that design process. There's been some significant failures. So if you really want to open your eyes up, you don't have to be in tech. You just have to be interested in how McKinsey and PwC in particular are the key auditors behind this qualification. They provide all of the statistics. It's a global movement, and I would highly recommend it. I think it's about 49 quid to get a certificate. Go for it.
Excellent. Sutapa, you had any resources you'd like to share?
It's generally the internet, and as Louisa has typed in the chat box, McKinsey has been generating a lot of good reports also. And based on all these studies and talking to people and my own experiences, yes, I have designed two PowerPoint presentations, which I use when I talk to the people or when I go for trainings. And the best way is to engage in conversations. I think that is the best way in which things can come out. And then, you kind of tweak the processes and the things which you are doing or which your organization is doing, so that eventually you are evolving towards a more diverse and inclusive organization. That's all.
Okay, excellent. So those are all the questions we have so far from the audience. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Miriam to continue forward. And then I think we'll close out in another 10 minutes or so.
Thank you so much, Daniela. We had some amazing questions from the audience and wonderfully answered. I do have a last question to all of you, and I'm opening the floor to all the panelists now. The question is that from your experience of championing the diversity and inclusivity cause, what must we start or stop doing to make the workplace more diverse and inclusive? Now, just 1 to 2 key points that are most pertinent would do, starting with Alexandra.
Okay, thank you, Miriam. I would say, no, again, I'm focusing on our industry right now. The one thing that needs to be done, I think there are a lot of actions and initiatives being taken to hire diversity, which is great. I think there has to be a huge focus on promoting diversity. And that goes back to what I was saying before regarding CSOs around the world. Because it's great to hire diversity, but if they stay at mid-level management, and some of them want that, right? So it's perfectly okay. Don't get me wrong here. But I'm saying the way jobs are described, designed, even promoted makes it really hard to actually promote that diversity that organization wants so much, right? And I think inherently with the way most jobs in this industry are conducted and done, naturally create a glass ceiling. And when I say glass ceiling, it's not only for women, it's for that diversity piece, right? So that's the one thing that we have to focus much more on promoting that diversity that we've hired. That's one thing. I don't want to spend too much time, so that's why. Thank you.
That's brilliant and beautifully put. Yolanda, would you like to add something to that?
Yeah, I think, and this is hard because I've gone through a whole list already, but I think if you, from a recruiting perspective, if you are recruiting candidates from minority areas, I think that the panel of recruiters needs to reflect that of the candidate. And it's a known fact now that if there isn't a woman on a panel of interviewers when there's a woman candidate, it's less likely that she's going to get hired. And it's less likely that a black man would get hired if there are no black people on the panel. And I think that HR companies should just make it utterly mandatory to make sure that the panel of interviewers reflect the candidates. And that way the candidates are already going to feel that they're working or entering or possibly entering into an inclusive environment. My company, my employer, I should say, not my company. My employer has introduced an initiative for all of the managers, and that's a pretty hefty project. There's a lot of managers across Virgin Media O2. And the initiative is that in our objectives this year, we have to include one of them as an ED&I objective. And the instructions are to lean into an area of equity, diversity, and inclusivity that you don't understand, learn about it, and share what you learn. And so I actually decided to lean into the transgender community. And I started to open my eyes up and learn how I could be a better ally and learning why pronouns were really important to people. And then I was so excited about it that I'd learned something and I told everybody, and I'm now telling you. It's contagious. And I think what a great initiative for that very conscious, brand conscious employer to get all of its managers to include mandatorily a ED&I objective. That's a really good start. We could all do that.
That's amazing. I think, and that should be built into all organizations as an objective. Sutapa, coming to you, would you like to add some points to that?
Well, I think if I were to choose, I would choose two things. One would be obviously the recruitment process, hiring process. One has to see that those biases don't play out. The biases of the recruiter when he or she is hiring new employees. So that person or the group of people who are actually going to hire, they need to be trained very, very carefully, especially on the unconscious bias side, because the most prominent bias is affinity bias. I would obviously want to hire people who are more like me, but that is the feedstock of disaster for the organization in the future, because if everybody thinks the same way, everybody has the same suggestion, you don't get anywhere, you don't progress, you don't evolve, right? So that thing is very important.
You're mute, Sutapa.
This tech failure. I was just going to talk about if technology helps in hiring, then please use that, and look what happened. So yeah, that fact also remains that if technology results in unbiased and more objective and broader hiring, then please use it. But be careful, even AI can have biases, it can lead to biases. You have to be very, very careful about the software which you are putting in. Right. So that hiring aspect is one. And yeah, the red flag was, I was talking of the red flag. The red flag is when the organization feels that, okay, this person is not a fit. This is a red flag. And as Alexandra would say, you know, we have to question our phantom brain also many a times. Why? If that person is not a fit, it is very likely that the organization needs such a person who is not like everybody else, right? So that is one thing, the hiring aspect. Second thing would obviously be the safe spaces where the employees can talk about things if diversity and inclusivity and equity is lacking, and not be afraid of it, and also give suggestions as to how that aim can be achieved, scaling it up. And you know, last but not the least, yes, compassion and empathy in the C-suite. So these are the three things I would say. Yeah.
Compassion and empathy and questioning ourselves and our own biases. Amazing. What a good takeaway, and what amazing closing remarks from our wonderful panelists. This pretty much brings us to the end of this very insightful discussion. Before I hand it back to Daniela, I'd like to thank our wonderful panelists and amazing audience for being with us today. Thank you so much. What an inspirational discussion we've had here today. Over to you, Daniela.
Okay, thank you, everyone. And this was a great, great topic. I hope that we can get all of you together again to talk about not just why is diversity important, but how do you go about it? And the discussions were extremely insightful. And again, thank you, Miriam, for doing such a great job on moderating and keeping us all on track as we went through. So lastly, if you want to, please continue to stay connected to the ISRM. We continue to do joint programs with INSSA, and we very much welcome you to, let us know if there's additional topics. If this is another topic that you'd like for us to go into further depth on, we very much welcome that. And everyone have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.